Let's talk about robotic process automation. But before we start talking about it within the Power Platform, it's worth describing what it is. Well, it's a software with AI and machine learning capabilities. And the software is configurable. And in fact, it needs to be configurable. And that's what it differentiates it from deep learning AI, because it creates, it has to be configured by a person, and it creates these wee bots that go out and perform tasks again across multiple different applications. And they do this by following a defined workflow. And the workflow is just like a task list. And because they need to be configured, like I said, they're a lot more affordable than deep learning applications. So if you think of a deep learning application, a bot, that'll go out and it'll follow maybe a list of tasks, but then it'll try and figure out where it goes wrong if something goes wrong. RPA won't, it will just follow the list of tasks, and if it goes wrong, it will fail. So they can't learn things, but you can tell it to do things. So RPA tends to be used to replace repetitive and simple and onerous tasks. And in particular, admin tasks such as moving data from one system to another. And because of that, we've seen heavy adoption in banks and financial institutions. So rather than have your assistant Lynn copy invoices over from Dynamics 365 to your legacy invoicing system that doesn't have an API, you could replace that process with a bot, and that will then allow you to focus on other work that requires more skill or a more human approach. And that brings us to a concern that some have regarding RPA AI in general. So similar to how robotic machinery was taking and has taken over a lot of manual labour jobs, there's this fear that RPA will take over some administrative office roles. And I think people have the right to have that fear. There was a study at Oxford University that predicts that up to 35% of jobs in the UK and the US will be automated by 2035. So that's not that long ago. That's not long away. 15 years, they reckon that almost half of jobs in developed countries will be automated. And this could mean a large number of unemployment rates in certain industries. The argument in favour of robotic process automation is that instead of creating unemployment, adoption will take the robot out of the human. Meaning that bots will be taking over the more mundane and repetitive tasks, and that allow humans the time in these roles to concentrate on the more meaningful portions of their day. So it's up to you where you stand. I think there is definitely a fear there. I personally think that as technologists and people implementing this software, that we've got some sort of responsibility as well to help the workers that are affected by this technology. And it's certainly something that the government should be looking at right now, because 15 years isn't a long time before that we see whether that stat comes true or not. So on to RPA in the Power Platform. It was introduced in Power Automate in November 2019. I think it was Ignite, or it was around the same time that the rebrand of Flow from Flow to Power Automate. And it became available in April 2020, so it's reasonably new. It was introduced as a different type of flow called a UI flow, and they're still called UI flows. So within Power Automate as an application, you can create a flow and you can create a UI flow. It allows makers to record actions on their machine in a web browser and then edit those actions. And then once saved, it adds those actions into a container, which is called the UI flow, because you've got a UI flow connector. And those UI flows can be called from standard flows. So you have to have, in order to call these UI flows, you can't just trigger them, you have to have a parent flow trigger them. They're called quite similar to child flows. We'll see that in a minute. And so you can use Power Automate with 400 plus connectors to automate processes between applications with an API. But when the application doesn't have an API, you have to configure a UI flow to perform the tasks. And that kind of bridges the gap between those legacy applications that don't have an API. It doesn't have to be legacy applications, it's just that most applications that don't have an API will be a legacy application. But you basically set up a machine somewhere that runs, and the UI flow connects to that machine via the on-premise data gateway, and then on-premises, John Conroy keeps correcting me, and it gets the kind of data, it runs through the workflow, performs the task on that machine and within the legacy application. And that allows you to get data out of that application or put data in and use it within the Dataverse or whatever other application you're integrating with. And so until recently, makers would record the UI, the UI workflows using Windows Recorder, and that was for applications that were hosted on a machine, or Selenium IDE, and that was for web-based applications. But then Microsoft made an acquisition earlier in the year of a software company called Softmotive, and they were quite a well-established in the RPA industry, and we've seen the release recently. Couldn't find the date when it was released, but of Power Automate Desktop, and it's in preview at the moment. And it's Power Automate Desktop that we'll use to build the UI flow this evening. It seems to be, my first impression is it's far more feature rich than the other two and easy to use, and it seems to be a bit more reliable. Although that's famous last words. Let's see how the class goes before we say it's more reliable. So there's some prerequisites. The reason I'm going to go do this slide now is because I just don't want to be jumping in between slides after from demo to kind of training and then back to this slide. There's a few prerequisites. You need to install the Power Automate Desktop on whatever machine you're running your application on. I've got mine set up on a virtual machine. I'll speak a bit about that at the end of the session as well. And you need to install the on-premises data gateway on that same machine. And the on-premises data gateway has to match the machine has to match the region of your Power Automate environment. So once you install that, you can get to the settings and change the region, or it just won't work. So again, if you're going to start this, just make sure that you've got permission to install software on your machine. So if you're using a work laptop, you might not have that administrative privileges. Make sure to either do a virtual machine. So what I did, I put it on my my laptop. My laptop's my own laptop, so I've got admin privileges. It's quite a powerful laptop, and it worked fine for, that was a couple of months ago. Worked fine. Did a load of UI flows. Came back to it a few months later, and although it works, it doesn't tell the flow that it's finished. So there's errors there. I think a lot of environment variables can affect how it runs. So what I've done, and this is part of the RPA admin in a day lab material, is it tells you how, for the trainer, it tells you how to set up Azure Labs, and that was really beneficial for me because I can now set up a virtual machine in Azure. I can set up the same, a couple of virtual machines using a lab, and I know that's connected to the internet, and the only thing it does is run the Power Automate RPA stuff. And I mean, it costs about 42 cents per hour to run those. So it's worth that investment rather than do what I did and invest hours trying to get it configured on your own machine just for it not to work. So we'll go through a walkthrough. So we'll go through a bit of a demo first. Let me just flick over. I'm just making sure my virtual machine stays awake. So I'll use a demo first. I'm going to talk about this total invoicing. This is just a sample legacy application that you get with the RPA in a day content, and it allows you to add invoices. And that hasn't got an API. It's just a desktop application, a legacy application, you could say. And so what we're going to do, we're going to run through a wee demo of how I used UI flows to input data into that. I'll run through the demo first, and then hopefully it'll work. And then we'll look at how we built that UI flow, the UI flow part of that demo. So I'm going to start. What I'm going to do, I'm going to actually open. Hold on a second. I'm going to open my web browser. So what I did, I created a wee, make sure that's behind there, because I want you to try and see how this works. So what I've got, this is my virtual machine here, which has the on-premises data gateway installed on it and Power Automate Desktop. And this is my Teams environment. And so I've done, I've created a wee chatbot called Lynn, because Lynn's my personal assistant. And I'm going to ask Lynn a question. I'm going to copy the question from my notepad because this was a bad choice of demos, because I keep spelling license wrong and she keeps not understanding me. So I'm going to ask Lynn if I can order some licenses, and hit enter. And so she should kick in and say, of course. So she can help with that. She'll need some information first. Can you give me the name of the customer? My customer is Closing Pin Limited. Once she looks for the name of the customer, she wants the SKU, and I'm going to copy this from Notepad again because I don't know it off by heart. But I'll say that. So that's Dynamics 365 for Customer Service Enterprise. And then she needs the number of licenses that are required. We'll order loads, we'll order 50 licenses. So she goes off and does some stuff in Dataverse. And she should come back. She's typing busily away. She should come back with some more information. There she goes. So she's checked. She wants 50 Dynamics 365 for customer service licenses. So she's found the product. The customer, she knows the customer doesn't have any other Dynamics 365 apps because again, that's data that's in their common data set, sorry, Dataverse. So that's going to be charged at £71.60 per month. That's the total. So we've got a total, and the invoice is going to be sent to Paddy Byrne. That's me, Paddy Byrne at free4365.com. So I'm the primary account. So if she's happy for me to process that request and invoice the customer, I'll click yes. And this is the bit that what will happen as I click yes. This is the bit that can go wrong. The invoice within Dynamics 365 or Dataverse will change. The status will change, and it should run the UI flow. So the reason I've put this up like this is when I click yes, wait a few seconds, you should see the application, the UI flow running on this machine in the background. So I'm going to click yes. And this is the bit that if anything goes wrong, this is where it will. So okay, that's been processed. Did that answer your question? Yeah, we'll give her a 5 out of 5 for effort, Lynn, even though we've not seen it fully working yet. Hopefully in the background, all going well, we should see our UI flow kicking in. What I'm going to do, I'm going to keep an eye on my other screen just to make sure it does, so we're not sitting waiting here for nothing. Oops. There we go. So Contoso invoicing app gets opened. You should see her starting to type things in. And it closes it, and that's all done by UI. So that application doesn't have an API. It's sitting on a virtual machine somewhere. It does it as a UI flow and does that. And what we'll do, we'll go and build that in a second, just to show that something can happen once it finishes, because that's the bit I had trouble with. Yeah, there we go. We get a flow card to say that our invoice has been raised in the system. So the invoice ID is taken from the legacy application. And that just shows that has finished, because like I said, the problem I had on my laptop, it was working fine, and then after a few months I set it up and it wouldn't let the flow know that it was finishing. It would just say there was a connection error, and that's why again I'm recommending you just put it into one of the labs or a virtual machine somewhere, just so that it's not a machine that you use and install other apps and stuff like that on daily. But I'll show you how we built that wee demo, the UI flow bit anyway. So if I open up, this is me on my normal machine now. This is me on my, is it me? Yeah, this is me on my normal machine. So this is the flow. I'm going to be ridiculed for not naming my flow steps, but I dare not. I got it working, so I dare not change it. It does some stuff in Dynamics 365, but then it does the UI flow. So if the status reason within the Dataverse is equal to 5, it runs a UI flow and then posts a message to Teams. And if you look at the UI flow here, it is just the run a flow using Power Automate Desktop, because that's the software we're using. You select the UI flow. We're running an attended mode. I haven't played about with unattended mode yet, but that's the next step. Priority preview, I only noticed that appear today, so I don't know whether that's new or I've just missed it. And then you've got the input parameters, and I've taken them from the invoice record within Dynamics 365. So how did I build that bit? So what we'll do, we'll just rebuild that and we'll point it to another UI flow. So if you go to Power Automate and go into a solution file, we'll click new and we'll do UI flow. And this is where you get prompted to install the software. If you don't have the software installed, it'll come up with a message prompting you to install the software. And I just realised I've done this on the wrong machine. I need to do it on my virtual machine because that's where the gateway is. So sorry, I'm just going to my virtual machine again. And I'll open up Power Automate on that. I don't know if it matters what machine you do it from, but this is the one I've had working. So we're in our solution, create a new UI flow. I said you'll get prompted what type of flow you want, or you'll get prompted to download the software. And we'll use Power Automate Desktop. Give it a name. Let's go invoice version 3 and launch the app. It takes a wee while for it to launch. There you go. So if you've used the previous versions, you'll see that this looks a lot slicker. There's our invoice v3 that we're going to use. Opens up. And we have no actions available in here because we're not creating anything. So the first thing we need to do to create your UI flow is to open the program that you're going to use. So I think if we choose run, and it's just going to be a bit slow for searching. Let me see. System, run application, this is the one. So we double click that. It appears here. So we look for the path of the application that we're going to run. I was hoping it would save the path for me rather than me having to go for look for it, but no such luck. I just copy it from the shortcut. So we're going to where our application or legacy applications installed. We're going that one. I also just noticed that I didn't notice this step here. I haven't tried this yet, but you can continue immediately or you can wait for the application to load. I've actually put a wait in for it. So we'll just do it the way that I know but it should work. So continue immediately, click save. So that's the first step in our UI flow. Second step we'll put in, I've noticed that it does take a wee while to load up the application and it will click in the wrong place or it will click too soon. So I put a wait in of kind of 3 seconds. There we go. And it's in seconds, so I just do 3 seconds. And then we will start the recorder. So this is what we're going to record now using this desktop recorder, the steps it takes to input an invoice. So we'll open the application first because that's what the flow already does. And then we'll hit desktop recorder. See your desktop recorder. So these are the actions that we're going to record here. And then if we move that over a bit, start recording. And you just need to highlight the bit that you want to select. So it highlights in text. So we'll click invoices. Then we'll add an invoice, make sure it goes red. A red frame around it. And just put in some test data at the moment. So I'm just going to put in test at test.com because we're going to overwrite this with variables. I'll just put an amount of 10 in there. And we'll say that that's invoiced and save it. Now this is a wee bit tricky, I found. You taking a hit the control right on it because there was one of the controls, I think it was the new or the save. I must have not quite pressed it right. or the image. I must have just outside the image. You have to make sure you get it spot on. So we'll save that as it's saved, and then we'll just close that over. We'll use File and close. File and exit. Just to exit the application. And once we're done, we'll click Finish. And that adds the steps to the Power Automate desktop application for us. So what we could do, if we save that, we can just run that and test it and see if it works. Just run it. So that's fine. 3 seconds wait, it's fine. Cool. Cool. So that's us run our process, the majority of our process. You can actually hit desktop recorder again. If you've missed anything out, you can hit desktop recorder and it'll just start another recording down here, and you can move, drag and drop the steps around. But that's us just running it with the test data. We want to put inputs and get outputs out of this as well. So we'll start by doing some inputs, and we'll do an input for each of these text inputs. We add inputs over here. So let's say input, and we'll say our name. I'm just going to use the same external name. And I'm just always going to use string as well. And we'll do another one, which we'll do, what was it again? It was contact email. And the last one was amount. I put the amount in as a string as well. Oops. So I've created 3 input variables, and we can assign them to each of these elements here. You assign them by hitting the ellipse, edit, and that's the text that tells it to fill in. So if I delete that out, I can hit this little function icon here, and I can say put in a variable, and it puts the percentage and stuff like that over each side as well. So we're going to input the account name into that text box. We'll use the contact email on that one. And where we put 10, we'll add our amount. There we go. So that's us done 3 input variables. We want to get something out of this, or some sort of notification to say that that's it done, so that we can notify our salespeople that Lynn's inputted the invoice correctly into the system. So that becomes a wee bit trickier, getting the output variables, because you have to point it to an area on the screen. The action you use, that we're going to use in this case, is get details of a UI element. If I remember right, I have to refer to my notes for this bit, because let's just put that in there. So before we set the invoice to paid, we'll get an UI element, and if you click the down arrow here, add a new UI element. So these are all the new elements, UI elements that are in the system, but we'll get a new one. And we get this box up here, and it says to capture a new UI element, click Control and left click. So we need to open up our invoicing app again in order to do that. So let's just follow the process manually again, so that we get the right number. And it's that one there. We'll do it. We'll save it first, and then we'll get it. So it's that element there we want. So I want to hit Control and click, and then we get this text 1035 there, and that's us got the element that we're going to use to set our output. And look at that, this produces this variable called attribute value. Now, I kept making the mistake of using the wrong action here, and this action here doesn't give you the attribute value. So I've used the right one this time, thankfully, for the demo. It's the get details of the UI element, and click save. And then see if we click this icon up here, this UI elements icon, we can select that text 1035, because that's the name of our UI element. And if we click the ellipse and edit it, and then click this ellipse again, and we're going to edit the selector. If we scroll down to the bottom level of the hierarchy, sometimes this is checked. So this name checked here, you have to make sure that's not checked. So we've got a UI element. Now we want to set a variable. So we'll create a new variable, an output variable for the invoice ID. So it's output, and it's var invoice ID. Let's create that. And so after we get that UI element, this step here, so this is us populating our text boxes with the input variables, the get details of the UI element, we'll get that item there. And notice it still says text 1035 because that's what it's called within the system. And we're going to then set our new variable that we created, our var invoice ID, to that variable. So set variable, and we'll drag and drop that. Oops. Down here. Var we can select that to attribute value. We'll click it. Yeah, that's it there. So we'll click save, and we'll hit save again. So I'm not going to run that just now because I'll run it from a flow. So if I go back to my environment, I'll close that down, and that's us created our UI flow. And I will go back to my solution file, click new flow. And what I'll do, I'll just call this one from a button just for quickness, really. Search for UI flows. And the one we want is this Power Automate Desktop Preview, because you've got a different connector for each one of the different methods of creating them. Invoice v3, run mode, is it attended? Okay, I don't know what the priority field is. So account name, let's do 34365, contact email, let's do Logan.burn.com, and the amount, look at a nice big amount, say 500 quid. And so what you'll notice as well, the first time you try and do this, it might, if you haven't connected or used it before, it'll ask you for your connection details to your on-premises gateway, and ask you for the username and password of your machine. And then if you've got the gateway installed and configured, it'll just ask you to point to the gateway. So that's done and saved. And we'll just run a test, and then we'll see if that works. always takes a while to save. Still saving. There we go. Run flow done, and no hands, so you can see. We should see the invoice application launch and then it follow our flow. Aha, there we go. So yeah, let's put in the input variables. And once that finishes, so see, I actually forgot to put a compose in the end so that you could see our output variable. Hopefully the action will show you. And this is where, when I was doing it on my laptop, it failed as well. And why I had to set up on a virtual machine, it seemed to be, it wouldn't look back and tell the flow that it's successfully completed. If we look at here, yeah, so there we've got var invoice ID, and that's the output variable for that. So we can use that in a flow. And that's how it's done, really. You just use that UI flow Power Automate desktop connector, and you can call that from any flow. So I'll flick back to slides and just finish up. Yeah, so next steps, if you want to learn more about UI flows, there's the RPA in a day. That's the pack that I ran through. It tells you that the flow is really good that you build in that. So the trainers pack will show you how to set up the Azure labs, so you can just set it in a virtual machine. So if you're not familiar with Azure, I recommend getting on that because it just means you can scrap it and machine and then restart it up again based on a template, and it means you don't have any other environment variables on your machine. There's no other software running on there. You've got a fresh start for it. Then work. So do the trainers pack first. Then look at the student labs. They're in a day, and there's about there's probably about 8 hours of material in there. But the actual labs in PDF, you could probably go through them in about 3 hours. Once you're set up and go running. So I would recommend go through that. The examples, that bit that I did there, where you create an invoice using the Contoso invoice app and getting the output, it's that plus a bit of AI Builder. So you email an attachment, an invoice attachment. It recognizes using AI Builder the contents of the invoice, and it uses that to put into the invoice app, and then it does like an adaptive card to Teams to approve that. So there's quite a lot of good moving bits in there. Then we're really only just scratching the surface in this demo.